This is what Ecclesiastes 3 says. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and what God will call a past to account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. And I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. Well, we're going through a series looking at the book of Ecclesiastes, part of the Old Testament wisdom literature. And what we've seen so far is the writer is trying to search out, or at least look at some of the common answers that people come up for a meaning of life. And he's trying to do it from this mindset of what he calls under the sun. So remove ideas of God, remove ideas of heaven, remove ideas of a creation story, and figure out from this existence what is the meaning of life. Now, one of the common themes of the lockdown is a feeling of being trapped or imprisoned. Not being able to go out is hard. But that feeling that you have echoes, I think, what the writer of Ecclesiastes wants you to explore in this chapter, the sense of being trapped in our feeling of life. And in this little poem, in the first half of this chapter, let me put that up on the screen again so you can see it once more. What he's trying to do here is help us explore some of these themes, some of this idea of what it is, what life involves, and what happens in life. And really what he describes in this poem on the left-hand side there is the wide range of things that we go through in life. These are all the times we go through. And I think there's about 28 of these times that he has through this chapter here between birth and death. That's where he goes to. It's the time between birth and death and all the things we experience. And what he deliberately does is choose a whole set of different contrasts to basically say, this is the stuff we go through in life. There are seasons and rhythms in life, and we live with a kind of perpetual change all the time. Life is like that assault course that your children are building for you, some of you. We are living with perpetual change. Imagine living every day, and every day is like the last. Nothing really changes, without holidays, without weekends, and every day just moves one to the next without anything breaking out. And you're thinking to yourself, are you serious? I woke up this morning and I thought it was Tuesday. Well, what this poem points out is that we need change, but we also need stability. You know, we like that spring is different from winter. That's change. But we also like the fact we can predict when spring is going to happen. Those changes are not necessarily bad. But the second thing we begin to see through this chapter is just how some of the changes are dark. Some of them are about things that happen to us. Some of them are about the difficulties and the pains and the heartache that we go through. And the poem is clear. I mean, almost half of these things that are mentioned are painful or difficult things. Look at verse 4, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. This life inescapably includes pain and heartache. One of the things we like to tell ourselves about life is that it shouldn't include pain. We work very hard to avoid pain. And when it comes, we think, what went wrong? I thought that I'd broken through. I thought I was living a dream life. I thought I was beginning to live a life without pain. Why do I experience this? And we start to compare ourselves with other people because the illusion of control is gone. And once again, we're reminded of the vapor. We're back to the chaos of life. And this poem, I don't think it's supposed to be a particularly uplifting poem. I think it's all designed to get us to return to this question that he's been going through all the way from chapter 1, which is, what do we gain for our toil? We go through all these different changes and stages and seasons of life, and what does it profit us to experience all these things? And he sort of says that well, there isn't anything apparent. If you limit your search for meaning to this present realm with this life under the sun, what does it profit you? And it's difficult because life is amazing. It includes the amazing, but it also includes the mundane. It includes joy and dancing, but it also includes sorrow. And then at the end of it all, you say to yourself, well, what was it worth? How did I live my life? And he sort of comes to the conclusion to say, yeah, good question. What have you gained for all of this? And he's saying there is a sense of life. There is a sense of burden within us that we should have a substantial answer to that question. He says in verse 11 here, when talking about God is, well, in verse 10, he's placed a burden on people that he's laid on the human race. Why? Because everything is beautiful in its time, but he has set eternity in the human heart. There is some sense that we live with this dream that this should all add up to something, that it's going somewhere, that it's meaningful. And yet, with that feeling that we ought to leave with something, we're left with this hideous sense that there's nothing. And later on in the chapter, if we put the other verses up, he says this is a unique part of the human condition. A dog or a cat doesn't have this problem. They aren't aware of death in the way that we are. So what he's really doing is he's saying there are two issues that begin to get raised by all the different things we go through. The first is an issue of meaning. What do we leave with? What do we come away with at the end of it all? But the other is a question of justice. The second problem he sees is the problem of injustice. And what do we make of all of that? Look at verse 16. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. The place of judgment and justice that he's talking about, he's looking actually at Westminster, to the Houses of Parliament or to the High Court. And when he goes there and he sees the people who should be ruling, the very people who should be dispensing justice, what he sees is that they are not more pure. There is not a sense that they are our betters. They work actually for corrupt interests. And given that he, earlier on in this book, claims to be the king of Israel, we can see that he's saying that as an insider, not an outsider. He sees something of himself in this whole system, which is why political change or revolution rarely delivers what it promises, because you just replace one corrupt, immoral elite with another who are no more moral. They just work for a different set of corrupt interests. It's why we need to pray for our leaders, that they yield to God. But this quest for meaning and the quest for justice is what humanity have tried to wrestle through for generations. And lots of people have come up with solutions, different solutions to these two problems. What are some of the solutions you've come up with? I mean, the hedonist says, try not to worry about it. Life is short. Go out and enjoy it. But offers no hope to the one who suffers. and achieves nothing in the face of injustice. Or the Stoic says, there is no gain or profit. There is no reason. You just have to ride it out. History isn't going anywhere. But this view really, the view of the Stoic, teaches you to close off your heart. The price you pay for coping is to lose your humanity. The humanist says, well, there is no God to redeem us. We have to solve the problems ourselves. Of course, there's no reason for doing this, but we have to do it. And again, there's no reason or explanation of meaning. Other religions say that pain and suffering aren't real. It just needs to be denied. And that just trivializes your deepest heartaches and pains. And yet into all of this, the writer of Ecclesiastes, he doesn't just kind of lay out the problem under the sun. He also begins to hint at some above the sun thinking. There are some glints that begin to come through, that break through the curtain, some shafts of light that break through in the from the realm of above the sun. Let me give you three that he points out. The first one is that we should be thankful for the season that we're in right now. I don't know if you remember being a kid. I'm sure you do. We all wished our lives away, didn't we? We couldn't wait to grow up. I want the next birthday. We want the next phase. I want to watch older movies. I want to get a phone or whatever it is. And we struggle to embrace the season we're in right now. And what's the problem with that? Well, as you grow up, and the older you get, the more you just want to be young again. You know, one book I read on Ecclesiastes quoted Joan Collins saying, the problem with beauty is it's like being born rich and then becoming poor. You know, it's like that's the issue as we kind of go through life. We want to be old when we're young, and we want to be young when we're old. And the thing to do is we have to figure out what season of life we're in and live this season. That seems to be the message of verse 12, to be thankful and to find what satisfaction you can and to make appropriate decisions for the season that you're in. If you're in a season of lament and grief because you've lost your job, you're at risk of losing your job, don't hide that. Don't pretend that you aren't in that season. If you're in the winter of life, you need to put on the overcoat that says, yeah, this is the situation we're in and we're preparing for this. And at the same time, rather than just grieving about things that you're not able to do, you're not able to go on that great holiday you dreamed about, or you miss your friends, or there are things in this season that just make life hard. Maybe there are things for you to do in this season. There are things that God has placed in front of you to do right now. Are there people for you to connect with? Are there opportunities that you now have that you wouldn't have previously had? There is a time to be harsh with yourself. There is a time to be kind to yourself. Do you know the difference? Do you always lurch to the one and never the other? After enjoying a great season in life, do you mark it? Are you thankful for it? Because if you're wise, you know it doesn't go on forever. I think lots of the weird things we do are a result of a failure to properly come to terms with this, acknowledging the season that we're in and living in that season. I'm a hoarder. I love keeping things, old memories, old mementos. Why? Because I think I just struggle to let go of the life that's been and embrace the life that is and the life that is yet to come. I think that's the reason I love photography, because it gives me the power to crystallize a memory instantly. If you're a teenager watching this, or you're about to be a teenager, I think it's really hard growing up because you want the comfort of being a child, and that's a good thing. But dangled in front of you are all these other things that say, if only I could have them, if only I could do them, if my parents just offered me a little bit more freedom, then I would really start to live. And I think one of the most important things that you can learn, that any of us can learn to grow up well, is to learn to enjoy the season that you're in now. Don't waste your life chasing after tomorrow. Tomorrow comes soon enough. Learn to live life today. However trapped you feel by your parents, learn to appreciate it and be glad for it, to celebrate it, and at the end of it, be willing to let go of it. Why? Because as this poem says, in life, you're going to experience a lot. Some of it will be fun, more fun than you could dare to believe. Some of it will be really dark, and it will push you to the end of yourself and make you want to stop and get off. but you will need to find a way to live through it. And the writer of Ecclesiastes is setting up for us our quest. When we're young, we think our quest is, I must live life to the full. I must extract all the joy and meaning and satisfaction out of life. That's our quest. When we're old, we think, no, the quest now is to hold on to life as long as we can. But I think what the writer of Ecclesiastes is prompting us to say is, that's not the quest. The quest is to figure out, what does it mean? It's not just to think, how should I live, but why do I live? And once you have a why, you can live through any how. And he doesn't answer the quest for us right now, because God doesn't answer the quest. In fact, he doesn't answer the quest until really after the resurrection of Jesus. That's when Paul can write, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. But he does start to answer that quest here in verse 14. I know that everything that God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing can be taken to it. God does it so that people will fear him. And this is the second thing. This just hints at an answer above the sun, that God reigns. You get another little hint of it in verse 11. From our position, well, no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. No one can fathom it. No one understands or sees what God is doing. No one knows what to make of it. When we wake up in the morning, we don't know if this is going to be a day when we're dancing or a day when we're mourning. But the teacher wants us to know God knows. He knows the times. He knows the season you're in. From our position, it feels like time just drifts from moment to moment, from chaotic event to the next chance happening. And when something really unsettling hits us, it has the power really to force us off course because it's not in our plan. But you see, from the perspective of heaven, God is still in charge. And the change in your plans are not actually a change in his. And we might cry out to God and plead with him and ask the question, why? Why is this happening to me? And in verse 11, he seems to say, well, God does not intend for us to understand all of those things. Why? Because we are creatures and he is the creator. But God knows what he is doing. And he doesn't experience things in the way that you or I experience them. He doesn't experience time in the way that you or I experience time. I mean, think about how you experience the past. The past, I think, is something like smoke out of a fire. You know, the past, it was a real thing, but as soon as it's gone, it's turned into a vapor. It was real only for a time. And now it's gone. It's just a wisp of a memory. And verse 15 points out, it's only really God who sees and experiences the past as the present. It's God who knows what he's doing here. Oh, think about the future. The future to us is this vague expanse of open possibilities. It's no more real to us than a dream. And so we try and, I guess, lunge to escape the worst possible outcomes and build for ourselves something truly wonderful and meaningful. But for us, the whole experience of life now is about the now. We live in the flame of the now. The past is the vapor. The future doesn't exist yet. We live in the flame of the now. And we might not see, because that's all we've ever experienced, how deeply humbling that is about our experience of time. We are so held and bound to the experience of the now. Almost 1,500 years ago, St. Augustine wrote about our experience of time. And a couple of years ago, the physicist Carlo Rovelli argued, he was doing the Royal Institution lectures. And he said, well, we understand from modern physics about as much about time as Augustine did. And so the writer of Ecclesiastes say, you know what, you shouldn't be surprised at that. As creatures, we actually ought to revere God and worship God because he is not bound by the tyranny of the now. That's what he's saying in verse 14. If we don't know God, we should fear God because his experience of time is different from ours. And the things we can't control, God can control. And so life under the sun, you know, it's going to contain some terrible, some tragic things, and yet nothing takes God by surprise. But the real difficulty we face, many people say, well, then God isn't good, or God isn't powerful, or how is he in charge of all of these things? And I think that the writer of Ecclesiastes, he isn't interested in answering those things. He just brings us down to earth with a bump. He's saying, listen, there is only one version of history. And it's God who is in control. It's God who reigns. It's God who is in charge of time. In our last teaching series in Mark, you may have remembered the role of time. The appointed time God sent Jesus. And time again, he says, the time has not yet come, waiting for the hour to come, or waiting for the hour to be fulfilled, until finally Jesus completes his mission, giving himself up to death, followed by the resurrection. There is a time for everything in God's plans. But it's God alone who knows where it's heading. And he has given us a why. We might not know what is coming. We might not know always how to live, but he has given us a why. We are creatures, and we've been redeemed and rescued and brought into life with God the Father through God the Son, to be transformed through God the Spirit. We have been brought into union with him to be his children. We wait for him to make all things new according to his good time. And the third answer that he gives us, I think, is a sense that Jesus wins. I mean, he doesn't use that terminology here, but that's the third idea. I said earlier on, one of the problems that the teacher sees is the injustice of life. You know, and your life is going to contain real injustice. You're going to be ripped off. Your parents will fail you at times. Your job or your career will be full of false promises. At times you'll be lied to. You might be cheated on. I mean, I don't want to sort of go on and on about it, especially if you're a kid and say, you know, this is life. But there are things that we go through, we all go through, where we experience difficult things. And there is a craving for justice within us that we see that isn't yet kind of met by life. And sometimes you get the impression that life is just never going to deliver on that answer for justice, and it's not. And that's what he sees in verse 16. I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. But the teachers, it's like he's laying out for us to say, this is what life feels like and what it's, but he can't quite bring himself just to leave it there. He has to drop in a little hint of something, a little hint of above the sun thinking, to say, I can't leave you on that cliffhanger to say how this is resolved. I've got to tell you the end from the beginning. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. That's the third answer. There is a new hope for human justice. And it's that God will bring everything under himself in the end. Jesus wins. And I think that stands against the spirit of our age. You know, there is a hope in humanism, that through education, through transparent government, we are steadily building a society that is more just, that is more fair. There is a version of history that is now being written that revises all the things that have gone before and said humanity is improving. We, at the start of the 21st century, have got closer to utopia than anyone before. You know, you've got to revise and rewrite all those history books because we're the ones who stand in judgment of history and look over what's happened. And we are better. We are better people in the West now. We are better people because of our education, because of our background, because of who we are, because we're rational, because we're clear thinkers. Do you ever hear that? Do you ever tempted to think that? There's an English philosopher, John Gray, who he himself is an atheist. He wrote a book called Straw Dogs, where he pulls apart the whole humanist dream of that. He says, listen, you can change the structures, but don't ever you dare say we're getting better. So you can't do that because you can't change the human condition. And he says the dream that the humanists have of a utopian future that we build through our ingenuity, through our education, he says that is a filthy lie. And I'll tell you why it's a filthy lie. It's a Christian dream. It's Christians who place that in your heart. It's Christians who told you there's a good future to look forward to. And he strips it apart and says, don't you dare believe those Christians. They only believe it because of God. And if you don't believe in God, don't you dare believe that you've changed the fundamental human condition. You haven't. And what he argues is you need to pay the price for being an atheist, and the price you need to pay is the dream of heaven. And he says what this Ecclesiastes poem is what John Gray argues for. He says life just goes round and round and round. Philosophy, even my life's work, everything's going to outlive me. Nothing's going to last forever. It just goes round and round and round. And he answers the question in verse 9, what do you gain for all your toil? And he says, well, nothing, nothing. There's no meaning. Life is going nowhere. There is no great sense of history. It's without purpose. It's without sense. And of course, there's no justice. That's verse 16, isn't it? That's verse 16. You give in to the fact you're on a quest. You're on a cruel quest for fairness. And there is nothing, there is no end to the quest. You're never going to find what you're looking for. So the teacher can't bear it. He has to drop in verse 17. He has to say, it's only hope in God that you have a hope of justice. It's only hope in God. You know, if there's no hope in God, there's no such thing as right and wrong. There's no belief in morality. After all, if good and evil are simple, kind of equal and opposite forces, who should say whether good should triumph over evil? What makes evil so evil? And not only that, what hope do you have that anything will triumph over anything else? It's God who can set evil against himself and conquer evil and put everything right. It's only God who can redeem and rescue. And the shock for the teacher might be, you know, when God arrives, when Jesus actually walks on the earth, his work is not one of vindication to say these people were good and these people were bad and I've come to separate them. He hasn't come to punish the bad. It's a work of redemption. It's to be punished for the bad. And actually, that's what the writer couldn't see. What's the point of history? That God's grace is seen. That God's people are one to him. That God's grace and kindness are displayed for all to see. That's the point of history. That's where all this is going. Listen, your life might feel like an assault course. It might about to be feeling like an assault course. How do you make sense of it? Where is it going? What's the why that enables you to live through anyhow? I'm going to stop there. I want to pray. I want to pray a prayer, the prayer that comes at the end of 2 Thessalonians 1. Let me pray this for all of us. Paul in 1 Thessalonians has just been talking about the return of Jesus and the hope that's to come. And he says, with this in mind, we constantly pray for you that our God may make you worthy of his calling, and that by his power he may bring to fruition your every desire for goodness and your every deed prompted by faith. We pray this so that by the name of our Lord Jesus may be glorified in you and you in him, according to the grace of our God and the Lord Jesus Christ. Father, we just want to say amen. We want to say amen to that prayer, that you would complete the work in us that you have set out to do. Amen.